Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Myself, Jonathan MS Pierce's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 2nd of November 2023. Before we get into the map, please check out the key. If you don't know what the lines mean on my map, pause the video now. Okay, as you can see, not a huge amount of change to the map, both in the north and in the southern areas, some in the east. But we will start in the northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea. There are some changes according to Suriyat maps, but changes that we made yesterday, but they hadn't released, exactly as I said, hadn't released their kind of tweet to go along with what their mapping changes were. This is the claim that the situation on the northeastern front during the last 3 days, the Russian army has managed to recapture some positions south of Liman-Pershi. There you go. So north of Sinkivka, south of Liman-Pershi. As I said yesterday, we've heard these claims before from Suriyat maps, and they've been rolled back. I don't know how accurate these are, but that is what Suriyat maps has claimed of there. And according to the Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, there's not a lot of change along the rest of this front line. There is obviously activity taking place. Now, it's interesting, actually, George Barras from the Institute for the Study of War was interviewed on yesterday's Ukraine Latest. It's a really, really good interview. Nice long interview that gives you lots of detail. If you love hearing about like the weapons, the strategy, what's going on the front line, this is a really good interview. Go and listen to it. We're just going to pop into the end of that, where he talks about what he thinks is going to happen for the next few months going forward, now that the counteroffensive is sort of ground down, the Ukrainian one, that is. And he talks indeed about this northeastern area, which did surprise me, because I wasn't expecting this to feature going forward massively. But here's what he says.
Conflict. You've already said that is not the case, and we shouldn't expect that to be the case. What do you think the next phase of the war is going to look like in the next few months?
I think fighting is going to continue over the course of the winter. The weather is going to slow tempo of operations, but it's not going to stop. I suspect that the Russians are going to continue attempting attacks against Avdiivka, kind of like how they, perhaps as they might have done against Bakhmut, with just shoveling more resources into it and trying to brute force tactical gains over the course of a long time. I also am very concerned about a new potential major Russian offensive in a relatively underlooked piece of the theater, which is northeast Ukraine, in the Kharkiv, Luhansk area, heading towards the operationally significant town of Kupiansk in northern Kharkiv Oblast. The Russians have been reportedly deploying substantial forces to that sector, and there have been some Russian military journalists who have referred to the town of Kupiansk as, their words, not mine, becoming Bakhmut 2.0. Now, I don't know if it's going to come to fruition or not, especially depending on what executive decisions Russian General Staff makes or what Putin does. But there might be, I think, a renewed Russian offensive effort to try to push in that area as well. The Ukrainians, of course, are going to try to continue conducting their operations. Unclear to me when their southern campaign, they'll finally stop trying to conduct operations there. Hopefully they will not. And it's to be determined to see what kind of presence the Ukrainians can establish on the left bank of the Dnipro River in Kherson, which is where there's an apparent Ukrainian river crossing effort underway.
Well, George, thank you so much for dealing with.
So that's well worth popping into checking that interview out on the Ukraine Latest podcast. You can find that on YouTube, but also as a podcast, checking out any of your podcast providers. Right, we're going to go on to the eastern front now, down to Bakhmut. And as you can see, there are a number of changes to the map, particularly in the north here. So we have Suriyat maps saying that there's some gains for the Russians just along the road as it comes in, the M03 highway as it comes into the north of Bakhmut here, and that is or the E40 highway is a worry for the Ukrainians. This is Andrew Perpetua's talking about this area in the live stream, saying actually this is one of the most important areas and the Russians will not give this up. This is the key for them, and that's why they're defending it so heavily, and the Ukrainians find it so difficult to push their way down that road, because as soon as, like I said before, I see that as being 3 elements to this, and if any one of these elements goes, it undercuts the other two. So if the Russians were to lose ground here and the Ukrainians can make it through to the road down here, then obviously that weakens this whole area. If they're able to do it from the north and cut in from there, then obviously that cuts the road itself. And if they can do it from the west, then they can actually cut these two areas in two. So there are the potentials for all of this area to fall if any one of those points the Ukrainians were to get some large advantage. So I think the Russians are certainly filling this whole area with reinforcements and reserves, and I think they're going to hold on to that at all costs. Here, Syriac Maps says the situation north of Bakhmut. During the last 5 days, the Russian army has managed to recapture the forest belt south of the Bakhivka Reservoir and some positions northeast of Orikovo-Vasilivka, so just up there by the road. Exactly as I was just showing, plus this area here by the reservoir that isn't really a reservoir anymore because they blew the dam. But yeah, as you can see, Deep State Map also has the Russians advancing in that area too. So bit of a challenge there for the Ukrainians. They have been on the back foot in the Bakhivka area. You could argue that they're basically operationally withdrawing there. They don't see that as an area that's going to give them much joy going forwards, and they could be concentrating on other areas, but also a worry that the Russians may have pushed them back along the road there as well. Right, and then as we come to the south, and by the way, Andrew Perpetua has said in his live stream, sorry to consistently reference him, not sorry, because it's a great resource, he does such good work. He reckons that North Bakhmut is the area that the Russians will push. So you just heard George Barras talking about the Kharkiv down to Luhansk front line there. He's worried about Kupiansk being a target for the Russians. We've heard so much from Yevlash and other commentators or other spokespeople that there are 100,000 people in this whole area and they are presenting themselves as a bit of a threat. Andrew Perpetua is thinking that the north of Bakhmut is an area where he thinks the Russians, he's certain that they're going to attack there. He's really adamant that's where they are building up for attacks. In the south, there are still some gains for the Ukrainians. Here we have Deep State Map indicating that north of the railway line, just north of Klishchiivka, Ukrainians are clearing back the Russians a little bit more. Indeed, Military Lab here says on the Bakhmut front, the southern Bakhmut front, Ukrainian forces cleared all the Russian positions along the railway embankment north of Klishchiivka and continue to advance north along the Bakhmut-Klishchiivka road. Geolocated footage published by Russian sources shows that Ukrainian forces are operating about 300 meters north of the railway line and have likely entrenched in the newly achieved positions. So that is interesting bit of data there. Let's see how far 300 meters is from the railway line. So that is about there. So that's 400 meters. So pretty much where the defensive lines of all the mappers are really here, apart from Deep State. Deep State's pushing them a little bit further back there. So, and it depends where you're talking about, because Andrew Perpetua has the Russians in this particular field pushed further back still. So a bit of variation with the mappers there, but that seems to broadly check it out. Not too much else to say about this area from various sources. Institute for the Study of War says Russian forces are bringing reserves to the Bakhmut area to renew active offensive operations. So again, is this kind of what Andrew Perpetua is talking about? After being on the defensive, although ISW has not yet observed indicators of Russian reserves arriving in the Bakhmut direction or the presence of additional Russian troops in the area. So at the moment, they are kind of assertions without proper evidential backing, but it could well be the case. We're going to come down to Avdiivka now, further to the south, and as you can see, some gains here for the Russians. Now, this is just to remind you what's going on. So Avdiivka, and we're still hearing that the Russians are losing huge amounts of kit here. There's new stats coming out, it seems every day, of the number of pieces of kit that the Russians have lost here. They've lost more. I mean, someone was arguing, David Howes reached out to me on back channels to say, look, someone on your threads has claimed that since, I don't know, since June or something, there's been a 1-to-1 ratio loss of Russian losses to Ukrainian losses. It's just like it's just not possible. So in Avdiivka, the Russians have lost in 2/3 of a month more stuff than the Ukrainians have lost in 5 months in the Robotyne area. So given that this is the area that the Russians claim that the Ukrainians have lost most of their stuff. Like this is Malatok Machka filmed from 27 different angles. And the Ukrainians did lose a bunch of stuff there, but a bunch of stuff for the Ukrainians is not the same bunch of stuff for the Russians, right? The Russians have a much bigger, I guess, resource draw to draw from. And when they lose enough vehicles to make them think, okay, let's stop. In Vuhledar, that was like 100 vehicles. For the Ukrainians, that's like 10 vehicles. Oh, we just lost 10 vehicles in a day. Yeah, let's put the brakes on that. Whereas the Russians, that wouldn't put the brakes on for them. So, yeah, the stats are looking bad for the Russians. They have lost some serious kit just since June, but really since October, the real uptick of kit around here. So it's been really difficult for them. But as discussed many times with you already, that is part of their kind of doctrine, which is take huge losses as long as you get some success, as long as you can justify those losses with a few troops in position or a few hundred meters here and there. But they are pressing in both the north and the south of Avdiivka. But in the north, it's interesting because yesterday I said that there were these claims that the Ukrainians had advanced 2 kilometers down, up to 2 kilometers down this road, which was absolutely huge. And indeed, you're still seeing these claims. So this has just come out half an hour ago, an hour ago. David D, who's very pro-Russian, take his claims with a pinch of salt. But more and more reports are saying that Ukrainian counterattack has taken 2 kilometers of land behind the Russians. Now, I would say he's probably drawing from last night's claims. I'm just trying to work out today, A, whether that's at all true, and B, well, what's happened since. Because then you get claims like here. I mean, the claims are that the Ukrainians had advanced all the way down to here, and yet you have Syriac maps saying at the end of last night that the Russian army is across the railway and took control over a series of positions south of Novokalnyove. And that would not be coherent with the claims of the Ukrainians advancing down there. They would be doing an about face and trying to head the Ukrainians off behind. So I'm not sure that both those claims can be true. So is it true that what the Ukrainians did or were purported to have done? So are you Cuban artillery shelling an apparent Ukrainian counterattack north of Krasnohorivka? So this is geolocated. Now this source says if this is accurate, this is a significant event and rather a deep penetration. So this is apparently where the Ukrainians were on that footage being targeted. So let's see how far that is behind the Russian lines. Well, that's that's 1 kilometer, and the eventual claim was, well, I saw various claims last night that it was 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers. So, either they got to there or they got all the way down here. And then what happened? We'll go into the ISW, and bear in mind the ISW compiles their reports in the middle of yesterday evening, and that would be around about the time this kind of information was filtering through. So this won't be the latest, but it does say geolocated footage posted yesterday shows a Ukrainian counterattack north of Krasnohorivka, but the source of the video claimed that Russian forces ultimately repelled the attack and forced Ukrainian troops to withdraw. Russian sources claim that the forces unsuccessfully counterattacked the waist deep, etc., etc. Okay, so now one of the sources that ISW was looking at to back up this claim of a counterattack said that the Ukrainians were then repelled. I don't know where that leaves us and what the accuracy is of those claims. It's interesting when you look at Rebar, and this is from last night into this morning, so early morning my time. Battle for Avdiivka, active advance of the Russian armed forces from the south and north. So this is obviously going to be pro-Russian generally. On the northern flank, almost always, on the northern flank, the Russian armed forces conducted several successful attacks along the railway northwest of Krasnohorivka, as a result of which the Russian troops gained a foothold near the railroad tracks. So that's going to be broadly, I think, what Syriac Maps is taking their claims from. Syriac Maps, I think, follows quite closely what Rebar says. On the southern flank, the Russian troops achieved the greatest success over the past 24 hours in the direction of Severny, where, as a result of a successful assault along the front, they managed to significantly advance both to the Khimik micro-district and to Severny, with 1 kilometer left to the village. So if that is true, that is a worry for the Ukrainians. Andrew Perpetua has recently been saying that he's less worried about the Russian attacks to the south, doesn't think it'll be so easy for them. Well, if they have got from, to 1 kilometer away from from Severny, that could be a bit of a worry. To be fair, according to Syriac Maps, they're pretty much that anyway. Nonetheless, there are claims from Rebar that the Russians are broadly up to about that line there, which, if you look at Deep State Map, the yellow line, and Syriac Maps, the red line here, in different places, they are already sort of claiming that. But yeah, and here we have artillery troops hammering a Ukrainian trench net. Oh, that's another Mikhailivka. Sorry, I ahead of myself there. So I just wanted to finish off this thought, which is that I don't really know what is going on to the north of Krasnohorivka. It could be that Ukrainians have got some purchase into the rear of the Russian lines here, and that could be causing the Russians a lot of consternation, or the Russians could well have repelled them and pushed them back to where they started, or even beyond. There are some claims I've seen of the Russians taking significant gains in this area. So yeah, who knows? We'll see, I guess, as time goes on. And yeah, as mentioned, there could be some success for the Russians to the south. And every bit of eked out success closes that pincer and gets the Russians closer to this 0542 highway or road coming into the west of Avdiivka. And that is a worry for the Ukrainians still in Avdiivka. They need that supply to be operational, that route to be operational. Right, then we're going to come down to this other Krasnohorivka. It's really irritating because when Krasnohorivka gets mentioned, because the Russians have been attacking at both of these places and they're so close to each other, I've genuinely got confused over the last few days, thinking they're talking about one when they're talking about the other. Ukrainian names. Right, we're going to come down to Novomikhailivka here, just to the east of another Konstantinivka. No, not the one, that's Kostantinivka, not Konstantinivka. Must be careful. Letters are important. As today's lesson. Right, Russian artillery troops hammering on Ukrainian trench network south of Novomikhailivka. So some saying that this indicates, I think in the ISW, saying that this indicates Ukrainian advance in the area. So we come down here, geolocated footage published on the 31st shows Ukrainian forces have advanced south of Novomikhailivka. Let's punch that in and see what Google Earth comes up with. Ukrainians there, well, no, that doesn't suggest advance. Sometimes I do wonder what maps ISW are referring to when they make those kind of claims of advances and whatnot. That is well within that's in the grey zone. There are different interpretations, though. I mean, that could signify advances, because some people, I know Andrew Perpetua's map has a grey zone right up to Novomikhailivka, though he's recently changed that. That's not how it's been all the time. So that actually might be accurate from the ISW to say that they aren't just hemmed back in at the settlements here, but they have actually got purchase over some of these tree lines to the south of Novomikhailivka, which would show a gain from what previous mapping might have showed. Bear in mind that I only show the Russian defensive lines. If I showed the grey zone and the Ukrainian defensive lines, and I'm using 3 mappers, then that's 6 lines. Then I've got a 7th with the 30th here, with the pre-counteroffensive line. It would just be lines all over the shop. You wouldn't know where you were. So I only show the Russian defensive lines, and that can mean sometimes that claims of Ukrainian gains are true, even though they might sit quite a long way back from where the Russian lines are, because of course those 2 lines are different. Right, now we're going to go to down to Donetsk, where we are going to Vuhledar next, actually. In the ISW doesn't mention anything about Vuhledar, and the reason is because this is just news coming out just now, which is the Russians are attacking at Vuhledar again. And this goes back to one of the things George Barras says on this interview is he is amazed that, and the ISW said this, I reported this early in the news piece, that they don't seem to learn from their mistakes. So Avdiivka looks like a rerunning of Vuhledar, and Vuhledar went terribly badly. And then you've got the river crossing back at much nearer the beginning of the war, where the Russians lost about 100 vehicles, again trying the same thing over and over. I think it was over 3 different closely sequenced days. They lost 100 bits of kit there, 100 bits of kit at Vuhledar, and then now we're talking maybe at least 2, maybe even 3 times that amount of kit in Avdiivka. It's just, they're not really learning from their mistakes. So Vuhledar here, what do we know? Well, not a great deal at the moment. Zelensky has held a staff meeting where he said, I received information about the situation at the front. There was an attempt by the enemy to advance in the Vuhledar direction, but our soldiers stopped it, inflicting heavy casualties on the enemy, dozens of vehicles, many killed and wounded. Defensive actions in Avdiivka and our offensive actions in the south are also ongoing. There are reports from the MOD of the arrival of shells and missiles and equipment, and intelligence reports on the situation on the front and the international arena and the state of the enemy. Blah, 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 blah. So that is to say that Vuhledar is, and this should be back here, Vuhledar is the scene of another Russian attack. And this is Special Kherson Cat saying this morning Russians made attempts to attack the Vuhledar front. It is said that at least 10 pieces of Russian equipment were destroyed. Photos by soldiers of 72nd Brigade. They've been operational around there for a long time, the 72nd. A lot of artillery successes there, and it seems like there's more today, as somewhere south of 10 bits of kit have been lost by the Russians. So yet another example of trying to do the same thing and expect different results, possibly, but we'll see how that pans out. Maybe I am being a bit too optimistic for the Ukrainians there, but I don't hold out too much hope for the Russians. This is going to be heavily mined. The Ukrainians have remotely mined a lot of this area through the ram shells that they send up by the artillery that drop sprinkle mines all over the area, and they can even do that whilst the Russian tanks and vehicles are attacking. So they make a move, get rebutted, and then drive back. And as they drive back, they run over mines that weren't there when they drove on the way. So they think they've cleared the area. They turn around, come back, and there have been mines that have been dropped behind them, and they explode on those mines. And that's one of the many reasons that it was such a nightmare for the Russians in the Vuhledar area previously. Anyway, we'll keep an eye on that one. Nothing really to be said about Vuhledar particularly. And then we move on to the Zaporizhia area. So this is Donetsk until we get to about Pryutny. As you can see that dotted line up there, it becomes Zaporizhia. We're going to go down to Robotyne, where Surat Maps actually has some successes for the Russians here. This might have been announced. No, this was last night. So it might have been on yesterday's map, though. It might have been another one that I talked about that there wasn't a tweet that showed as a pin. Anyway, the Ukrainian army made small advances west of Robotyne. So this is the slow advance of the Ukrainians, and as George Barras was talking about there, he's hoping that they'll keep continuing to press in the Zaporizhia direction, that they won't sort of give up and keep the pressure on the Russians. That will obviously keep attriting the Russians and keeping them fixed in this area, so the Russians then can't think about attacking in too many other places. So there are reasons why you might, even if you aren't succeeding in moving huge amounts, as long as the attritional ratios aren't too bad, then there are reasons why the Ukrainians might want to keep pressuring in Robotyne, even though the counteroffensive has sort of ground to a very slow pace. Then we come down to Kherson area. No changes to the map as I refer to in this area, but again we have a change. I say this, there's a change to Surat Maps. However, I think this might have been the one that was No, again, this is exactly what I have in the map already. So that, again, was changed yesterday, but the tweet came out today, I think. Or no, very late last night, so that's why. So anyway, just to then confirm the map change from yesterday, Ukrainian army continue expanding the control of Krinky. There is no truth to the Ukrainian troops are in full control over the town. So there were various claims about them controlling the center of the town. I doubt that's the case. They're definitely sort of trying to dig in on this line on the outskirts here. Surat Mats has them much further back, but it is, as I said yesterday, it appears to be quite a long, thin town with this kind of area just behind it over here to the southeast, southeast of the northeast. Yeah, it's just an odd-shaped place, but I think this is a place where we're going to keep our eyes peeled for some time, especially as the Ukrainians are pressuring in a number of places: Poima, Pishchenivka, Pidstepny, Kozachyi Lahiri, Krinky, and then possibly even further on. Though I was just looking at one source saying that if they can push around here, further around here, then it would give them, for some reason, I'm not 100% sure why, but the idea was it would give them greater ability to get mechanized equipment across. But I don't know the finer details of why that a push this way would particularly allow that. Nevertheless, that is what is taking place there. I'll just finally pop into the ISW to see what they have to say about the area. Russian mill bloggers continue to claim that Ukrainians hold positions and conduct attacks, and there's plenty of footage you can see of the Ukrainians active in the area online. Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces attacked near Poima, Pishchenivka, and that there are meeting engagements near Krinky, so all the places I've just mentioned. Russian mill bloggers claim Ukrainian forces maintain positions in Krinky, where they continue to reinforce and where Russian forces conduct heavy air and TOS-1A thermobaric artillery strikes. Interestingly, though, there was as I talked about the other day, there was a TOS-1 thermobaric artillery piece that was taken out around here. I can't remember exactly where. Thing about TOS-1s is they only have 5 kilometer range, so you have to use them very close to the front line, and that makes them all the more vulnerable. So it was somewhere around here. It's one of these where it's darker brown, and you could see the patches, and even though it was a nocturnal strike of a first-person view drone, it could be geolocated as to where it was, and it was somewhere in this general area, so that was lost. And the reason why that's important is because actually they don't have that many TOS-1As. If you go and look at Perrin's video from a couple of Saturdays ago, he did one on game changers. So which of the bits of equipment are game changers? It's a really good video. Go and watch that. He talks about TOS-1A and the metrics are, how famous, how much they're shouted about, how much they cost, how much it costs to run, the munitions, how much they might cost, and then what's the damage that they have done, and the but for, which is if it wasn't for them being there or being used, then what would the situation be? And all these metrics, and he measures all the bits of kit like HIMARS, ATACMS, TOS-1A, Lancets, so on and so forth. I would think he's missed out a lot. I know he's going to do another video on the topic, but they're something like first-person view drones, just as a general thing, I think need to be in there now, as they're so prevalent. But TOS-1A Terminator was talked about. I don't think there's enough of them, and they don't do. When they do damage, it's horrific. But I don't think, especially with the 5 kilometer range, that they are as effective as they otherwise might be. And so I don't think they're a huge, strategic challenge for the Ukrainians, even though they're a nasty piece of kit. Anywho, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate your support. That is a Frontline update. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pits.